The rule was simple. Professionalism is a fortress. It was the first and last line of defense in a world designed to chew up and spit out ambitious young men who wore their hearts anywhere but a locked cage somewhere deep inside their chests. My fortress was immaculate. The walls were high, the mortar was a mix of feigned indifference and relentless competence, and the gate was operated by a single, unwavering principle. I was here to work. I was not here to feel. For 3 months, the fortress had held. As an intern at Sterling Industries, a company that didn't just sit on the Fortune 500 list, but owned the mountain it was carved from, I was a ghost in the machine. I fetched coffee that cost more than my daily food budget, collated data that could shift global markets, and sat in meetings where the collective net worth could have erased the debt of a small nation. I was invisible, and I liked it that way. Invisibility was safety. He was the architect of this empire. Theodore Sterling. He wasn't a man so much as a concept, a gravitational force that bent the entire building around him. When he walked down a hallway, conversations didn't just stop. The very air seemed to thin, to hold its breath in deference. He wore suits that looked like they were woven from shadow and steel, and his voice was a low hum of authority that never needed to be raised. From my cubicle, a small gray box of synthetic material and recycled air, I observed him. It was part of the job, understanding the ecosystem, and he was the apex predator. I cataloged his habits. Black coffee, no sugar, before 8 a.m. A preference for minimalist design and maximum efficiency. A tendency to stare out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, his posture rigid, his hands clasped behind his back. A king surveying a kingdom that seemed to bring him no joy. I analyzed him the way I analyzed market trends and quarterly reports. Detached. Objective. A professional exercise. That was the lie I told myself. The truth was a far more dangerous thing. The truth was that when he occasionally looked my way, his eyes a startlingly clear shade of blue, like a winter sky, my carefully constructed fortress would tremble. The truth was that the low timbre of his voice could find its way through the cracks in my armor and resonate somewhere deep and forgotten. The truth was that my observation was not an exercise in professionalism. It was an act of quiet, desperate yearning. But the fortress held. It had to. Because men like me, interns from nowhere with nothing but a scholarship and a mountain of debt, did not get to feel things for men like Theodore Sterling. We got to work, and we were grateful for the opportunity. The project was a monster. A hostile takeover bid that had the entire mergers and acquisitions floor running on fumes and caffeine for 2 solid weeks. Nights bled into mornings. The sharp scent of coffee and ozone from the printers became the permanent atmosphere. My life shrank to the dimensions of my cubicle, my world defined by spreadsheets and legal documents. I was the last one there, besides him. It was past midnight on a Thursday. The city, a glittering, indifferent tapestry of light 28 floors below. The silence of the office was heavier than the noise, a pressurized void that made my own heartbeat sound like a drum. I was double-checking the final appendix, my eyes burning, when his shadow fell over my desk. I didn't have to look up to know it was him. The air changed. The subtle, clean scent of expensive soap and something else. Something uniquely his. Sandalwood and cold, crisp night filled my small space. Liam. His voice was quiet, but it cut through my exhaustion like a blade. I looked up. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, he looked tired. The impeccable armor of his suit was slightly loosened. His tie was gone, the top button of his stark white shirt undone. There were faint lines of fatigue around his eyes that weren't there in the bright light of day. For the first time, he looked less like a concept and more like a man. A tired man. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice a little rough. I cleared my throat, forcing the professionalism back into place. "Just finishing up the final checks." He nodded, his gaze sweeping over the documents on my screen. "Good work. You've been indispensable on this." Praise from him was a rare commodity. It sent a jolt through me, a warmth that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with the fact that he was the one saying it. "I am a professional. This is a performance review. I am building my career." The mantras cycled through my head, shoring up the walls. "Thank you, sir. I'm happy to contribute." He was silent for a moment, just watching me. It was an unnerving stillness. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, every flicker of my expression, every nervous shift in my chair, being catalogued and analyzed by a mind far sharper than my own. I focused on a fixed point on his shirt, right at the hollow of his throat. It felt safer than meeting his eyes. "How are you getting home?" he asked. The question was so mundane, so out of place in our sterile, hierarchical relationship, that it took me a second to process. "The subway. The night service should be running." A flicker of something crossed his face. Disapproval? Concern? It was gone before I could name it. "That's unacceptable. It's late, and this part of the city isn't the best after midnight." "I'll be fine, sir. I'm used to it." "No," he said. The word was soft, but it held the weight of an executive order. There was no arguing with it. "I'm heading out of the city tonight. My plane can drop you. It's faster." My world tilted on its axis. My plane. The words were delivered with the same casualness as someone offering to share a taxi. I stared at him, my brain struggling to connect the dots. The fortress walls didn't just tremble. A whole section of the rampart cracked and fell away into the moat. This is just logistics. He feels a sense of responsibility. It is a practical solution to a problem. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation, for a way to fit this into the neat box of our professional relationship. "Sir, I couldn't possibly. It's too much." "Don't be ridiculous, Liam," he said. And the use of my first name again felt like a deliberate dismantling of the hierarchy. "You live near the municipal airport, don't you?" "It's barely a detour. My pilot won't mind." He wasn't asking. He was informing me of a reality that had already been decided. "Get your things. I'll have the car brought around." He turned and walked away, leaving me in the echoing silence of his command. I sat there for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs. A ride home, in his private jet. The absurdity of it was staggering. It was a breach of every protocol, every unspoken rule that kept my world stable. But I found myself standing up, shutting down my computer, and packing my bag. Because when a gravitational force tells you to move, you don't question it. You simply fall into its orbit. The descent from the 28th floor felt like a journey to another world. The elevator was a silent, mirrored cage, and I could see his reflection standing beside mine. He was looking at his phone, his thumb flicking across the screen with ruthless efficiency, but I wasn't fooled. His attention wasn't on the device. I could feel it, a low-level hum of awareness directed at me. The air in the small space was thick with it, charged with unspoken things. I focused on the scent of his cologne, the way the light caught the silver of his watch. I catalogued the details, turning them into data points to keep the feeling at bay. The lobby was a cavern of marble and glass, empty and echoing at this hour. The security guard at the front desk, a man I'd nodded to 100 times, looked at me with new eyes as I walked out beside Theodore Sterling. I was no longer an invisible intern. I was something else. Someone who left, with the king. A black car, long and sleek and impossibly silent, was waiting at the curb. A driver in a dark suit held the door open. The interior was a cocoon of soft leather and cool, conditioned air. It smelled like him. It smelled like money and power and sandalwood. I slid in, careful to keep a professional distance between us on the wide bench seat. He got in after me, and the door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing us inside. The city began to slide by, its familiar grit and noise rendered silent and beautiful through the tinted glass. We were in a bubble, a separate reality moving through the world, but not a part of it. We didn't speak. I didn't know what to say. Thank you for the ride seemed woefully inadequate. So, how about that hostile takeover? Felt insane. So I stayed silent, my hands clenched in my lap, my entire being focused on the few inches of empty space between his thigh and mine. It felt like a chasm, a no man's land fraught with peril. The private airfield was a place I didn't know existed. Tucked away, discreet, it was a world of quiet efficiency. There were no crowds, no lines, no TSA agents. Just a small, sleek building and a jet waiting on the tarmac, looking like a blade of silver under the floodlights. Stepping onto that plane was the final, irreversible breach. The corporate structure had its rules. The car ride had been a gray area. But this was his space, his sanctuary. The cabin was small, intimate, with 4 plush leather seats facing each other. It was a masterpiece of understated luxury. Polished wood, brushed metal, the faint scent of leather and jet fuel. He gestured for me to take a seat, and I did, sinking into the ridiculously comfortable leather. He sat opposite me. The door was sealed, and a moment later, I felt the gentle push as we began to move. There was no one else, just us and the unseen pilots in the cockpit. This is a containment unit. That's what it feels like. A perfectly designed vessel to hold this unbearable tension. He took off his suit jacket, folding it with a practiced, economical movement, and placing it in the empty seat beside him. The white of his shirt seemed almost luminous in the dim cabin lighting. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong forearms dusted with fine, dark hair. It was an act of casual intimacy that felt like a detonation. The CEO was gone. The boss was gone. In his place was Theodore. "Drink?" he asked, his voice a low rumble beneath the rising whine of the engines. He was already moving toward a small, built-in bar. "I'm fine, sir. Water, maybe." He paused, his back to me. "Theodore," he said, without turning around. "My name is Theodore. I think we can dispense with the formalities, don't you?" My throat was dry. "Theodore," I repeated. The name felt foreign and heavy on my tongue. It felt like crossing another line I hadn't even known was there. He turned back, a glass of amber liquid in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. He handed me the water, and our fingers brushed. It wasn't an accident. I knew it wasn't. It was a brief, fleeting touch, skin against skin, but it sent a current of pure electricity up my arm. My breath hitched. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. He saw it. Of course he saw it. A small, almost imperceptible tightening at the corner of his mouth. He settled back into his seat, the space between us now feeling both smaller and infinitely larger. The plane tilted, and the lights of the city fell away beneath us as we climbed into the black, starless sky. We were suspended. Between the earth and the heavens, between boss and intern, between 2 men in a silent, pressurized box. The fortress was gone. The walls had been vaporized. I was completely, terrifyingly exposed. And the flight had only just begun. The sensory data was overwhelming. My hyper-analytical mind, usually a shield, was now a torture device, cataloging every detail with excruciating precision. The low, constant vibration of the jet, a thrum that worked its way up from the soles of my feet and settled deep in my bones. The clink of ice as Theodore swirled the whiskey in his glass, a rhythmic, hypnotic sound in the otherwise profound silence. His scent. It was stronger in the enclosed space. Sandalwood, yes, but underneath it, something warmer, more human. The clean, starchy smell of his shirt, the faint, masculine scent of his skin. I found myself taking shallow breaths, trying to parse the information without giving away how deeply it was affecting me. He was watching me over the rim of his glass. His blue eyes were darker in the dim light, shadowed and intense. It wasn't the scrutinizing gaze of a CEO evaluating an asset. It was something else. Slower. More deliberate. It was the gaze of a man who was looking. Truly looking. And I had the terrifying sensation that he could see straight through my cheap suit and nervous posture to the frantic, chaotic mess I was inside. I feel seen. The thought was a shock, a violation. I'd spent my entire life cultivating a careful invisibility. And here, in this impossible situation, I was being rendered transparent. "You're quiet," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. "A lot to process, I guess," I managed, my voice sounding thin. He took a slow sip of his drink. "The deal?" "That and this." I made a vague gesture that encompassed the luxurious cabin, the sky outside, the sheer improbability of it all. A small smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's just a plane, Liam." "For you, maybe." The words were out before I could stop them. A flicker of honesty in a sea of professional platitudes. His gaze sharpened. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. The movement closed the distance between us, shrinking our world even further. Now I could feel it, the heat radiating from his body, a tangible presence in the cool air. My own skin prickled in response, a magnetic pull I was fighting with every ounce of my self-control. "What is it for you?" he asked. His voice was lower now, more intimate. What a question. What could I possibly say? It's a cage. It's a test. It's the most terrifying and exhilarating thing that has ever happened to me. It's unexpected, I settled on, the word a pathetic understatement for the seismic shift happening within me. He held my gaze for a long, charged moment. The silence stretched, pulled taut like a wire. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. I felt an insane urge to confess everything, to lay bare the months of secret observation, the yearning, the carefully guarded fantasy. The urge was so strong, it was a physical ache in my chest. Just breathe. He's your boss. This is a fluke. Tomorrow you'll be back in your gray box, and this will be a bizarre dream. But then the plane hit a pocket of turbulence. It was a small jolt, nothing violent, but it was enough. His whiskey sloshed, and his knee knocked against mine. The contact was electric. A hard, warm pressure. My entire nervous system lit up like a switchboard. Every defense I had short-circuited. My first instinct was to pull away, to retreat to the safety of my own space. But I didn't. I couldn't. His knee remained pressed against mine, a silent, unmoving anchor. My eyes darted down to the point of contact and then back up to his face. He hadn't moved. He was still watching me. His expression unreadable, but his eyes were burning with an intensity that stole the air from my lungs. He knew. He knew what that simple touch was doing to me. He could feel the tremor it sent through my body. The turbulence passed. The plane settled. But he didn't move his knee away. The pressure remained, a constant, deliberate point of contact. It was a question, an invitation, a challenge. My mind was racing, a frantic spiral of panic and want. This is insane. This is career suicide. This is everything I've worked to avoid. But my body, that traitorous vessel, was leaning into the touch, craving more. The heat was spreading up my thigh, a slow burn that was both terrifying and intoxicating. He broke the gaze first, looking down into his glass, as if the answers to the universe were swirling in the amber liquid. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was heavier. It was filled with the thing that had just happened, the line that had been crossed not by accident, but by a shared, unspoken decision not to retreat. He finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost rough. "The price of a view like this," he said, nodding toward the window where the distant curve of the earth was just visible against a blanket of stars, "is that you're always looking at it alone." The words landed in the silent cabin like stones dropped into a deep well. It wasn't small talk. It was a confession. A crack in the perfect, powerful facade of Theodore Sterling. I stared at him. The fatigue I'd noticed earlier was more pronounced now. It wasn't just physical exhaustion from a long week. It was something deeper, a weariness that seemed to emanate from his very soul. The king was alone in his castle in the sky. I can't imagine," I said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "No, you can't. And you shouldn't want to. Everyone you meet either wants something from you or is terrified of you, or both." He looked at me then, and his gaze was raw, stripped of all artifice. It's been a long time since I've had a conversation with someone who wasn't on my payroll in one way or another. "I'm on your payroll," I pointed out softly. The professional in me, the part that was screaming in terror, felt the need to state the fact, to reestablish the boundary he was so intent on dismantling. "Are you?" he asked, a genuine question in his eyes. "Right now, in this plane, thousands of feet in the air, are you my intern, or are we just two people?" My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. The role of protector, the instinct I never knew I possessed, was rising up, a fierce, powerful tide. The intimidation I'd felt for months was gone, washed away by this sudden, shocking wave of empathy. He wasn't the powerful Mr. Sterling anymore. He was Theodore, a man drowning in a sea of his own success. And he was reaching for a lifeline. I wanted to be that lifeline. God, I wanted it more than I'd ever wanted a promotion, or a bonus, or a corner office. "I don't know," I whispered. And it was the most honest thing I had ever said. He leaned back in his seat then, breaking the physical contact between our knees. The loss of that small point of heat was immediate and profound, a sudden coldness that I felt deep in my bones. I had the absurd thought that he had retreated, that I had failed some unspoken test. But he wasn't retreating. He was surrendering. He set his glass down on the small table with a quiet click. He closed his eyes and rested his head against the back of the leather seat. The confident posture was gone. The shoulders that carried the weight of a global empire were slumped. In that moment, he looked achingly, breathtakingly vulnerable. "I'm so tired, Liam," he murmured, the words barely audible over the hum of the engines. It wasn't a complaint. It was a statement of fact. A truth so bare and painful, it felt like a wound. My carefully constructed world, my fortress of professionalism, my entire life's ambition, it all crumbled to dust in that instant. It was meaningless in the face of this man's quiet pain. My hand moved before my brain could stop it. I reached across the chasm between our seats, my fingers trembling slightly. I didn't know what I intended to do. Touch his arm? His shoulder? I hesitated, my hand hovering in the space between us. His eyes opened. They were fixed on my hand. He didn't say anything. He just watched it, and then his gaze lifted to meet mine. There was a question in his eyes, a silent, desperate plea. This is the moment. The final threshold. You can pull back, retreat to safety, and pretend this never happened. Or you can cross. I made the choice. I moved from my seat, kneeling on the plush carpet in the narrow space between us. The action felt both subservient and powerful. I was at his level now, our eyes just inches apart. The air was thick with the scent of him, with the heat of him, with the weight of everything unsaid. My hand, which had been hovering, found his. I didn't just touch it. I laced my fingers through his. His hand was large, warm, and surprisingly calloused for a man who dealt in billions. His fingers curled around mine, a grip that was firm, grounding. A drowning man holding onto a raft. We stayed like that for an eternity, just breathing in the charged silence. His thumb began to stroke the back of my hand. A slow, rhythmic, mesmerizing motion. Every defense I'd ever built was gone. I was wide open, completely vulnerable, and I had never felt safer in my entire life. Why? The word was a ragged whisper from his lips. It was the question that hung between us, the one that encompassed everything. Why me? Why now? Why this? Because, I started, my own voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. I searched for the right words, the professional words, the safe words, but there were none left. There was only the truth. Because when you look out your window, I don't want you to be alone. A single, perfect tear escaped from the corner of his eye and traced a path down his temple. He didn't wipe it away. He just kept looking at me, his gaze full of a raw, shattered gratitude that broke my heart and stitched it back together all at once. The lie, the premise of our entire relationship had been that he was the powerful one and I was the insignificant one. But here, in the quiet dark of the cabin, the truth was revealed. He was the one who needed saving, and I was the one with the lifeline. Stay, he breathed. It wasn't a command. It was a plea, a desperate, broken prayer. It was the only thing in the world I wanted to do. I didn't answer with words. I couldn't. The emotion was too large, a swelling pressure in my throat that made speech impossible. Instead, I tightened my grip on his hand and leaned forward, closing the final few inches between us. I rested my forehead against his. The contact was seismic, skin against skin, the rougher texture of his stubble, the coolness of his brow against mine. I could feel the faint tremor that ran through his body, a shudder of release, of surrender. I closed my eyes, and the world dissolved into sensation. His scent, overwhelming now. The clean smell of his soap, the faint, sharp tang of whiskey on his breath, the warm, human smell of his skin. It filled my head, intoxicating and real. His heat, a furnace against my own cooler skin. I could feel the pulse in his temple, a steady, frantic beat that seemed to be trying to sync with my own. His breath, a warm puff of air against my lips, unsteady and ragged. I found myself matching his rhythm, our breaths mingling in the tiny space between our mouths. Inhale, exhale. A shared, desperate cadence. This was intimacy of a kind I had never known. It was more profound than any physical act, more revealing than any confession. It was a complete and total dismantling of the self. There was no Theodore Sterling, billionaire CEO. There was no Liam, ambitious intern. There were only two souls, stripped bare, finding a moment of shelter in each other. He made a sound, a low, guttural noise in the back of his throat. A sound of such profound relief it was almost pain. His free hand came up, not to push me away, but to cup the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my hair. The gesture was possessive and yet incredibly gentle. He held me there, anchoring me, as if he was afraid I might disappear. "Don't go," he whispered, his lips brushing against mine as he spoke. The words were a ghost of a touch, a spark on a field of dry tinder. My world stopped. It didn't just stop. It ceased to exist. All the rules, all the fears, all the ambitions that had driven me for years, they were incinerated in that single, fleeting touch. There was only this man, this moment. The weight of his exhaustion seemed to flow into me, and I took it willingly. I wanted to bear it for him. The protector instinct was a roaring fire in my chest now. I would have fought armies for him in that moment. I would have held up the sky. I shifted, moving from my kneeling position to sit on the edge of his seat, turning to face him. The movement was clumsy in the confined space, but he helped, his hands guiding me, pulling me closer. I ended up half in his lap, my arms finding their way around his neck, my face buried in the crook of his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me tight against him until there was no space left between us. His hold was desperate, fierce. He buried his face in my hair, and I felt the dampness of his tears against my scalp. He was shaking. The great Theodore Sterling, the man who moved markets and built empires, was trembling in my arms like a lost child, and I just held him. I held him as the jet flew on through the silent, indifferent night. I held him through the quiet descent as the unseen pilots began their approach. I held him as the city lights grew from a distant smear to a familiar grid below. My fortress was in ruins, my old life a memory, and I had never felt more whole, more real, more myself. The gentle bump of the wheels touching the runway broke the spell. The engines spooled down, their whine decreasing to a low hum. We were back on the ground. The bubble had burst. Slowly, reluctantly, he loosened his grip. He pulled back, his hands framing my face, his thumbs gently stroking my cheekbones. His eyes, red-rimmed but clear, searched mine. The raw vulnerability was still there, but it was joined by something new, a spark of hope, a flicker of awe. "Liam," he said, his voice hoarse. He didn't seem to know what to say next. "It's okay," I whispered. "Breathe." He took a deep, shuddering breath, obeying the simple command. His eyes never left mine. The silence that fell between us now was different from all the silences that had come before. It wasn't tense or charged. It was calm, comfortable. a shared stillness that felt more intimate than the embrace itself. We had crossed a continent of unspoken emotion in the space of a single flight. We had departed as a boss and his intern. We were landing as something else entirely. Something fragile and undefined, but real. The door to the cockpit opened, and the pilot's voice, professional and disembodied, announced our arrival. The mundane reality of the world intruded, but it no longer had the power to break us apart. Theodore didn't let go of my face. His gaze was intense, unwavering. "This isn't the end of this conversation," he said. It was a statement of fact, a promise. "I know," I replied. An unspoken pact was forged in that final look. We would figure this out. Whatever this was. We would navigate the new world we had just created. Together. He finally released me, and the loss of his touch was a physical ache. We stood, collected our things in a silence that was now rich with meaning. He put his suit jacket back on, but the armor felt different now. I could see the cracks. I knew the man underneath it. As we walked down the steps of the jet and into the cool night air, he didn't walk ahead of me. He walked beside me. Our shoulders brushed, and this time neither of us pulled away. A car was waiting, identical to the one that had picked us up in what felt like a lifetime ago. He gave the driver my address. We sat in the back, the comfortable silence holding us. He didn't try to touch me again, but his presence was a warmth that filled the entire car. When we pulled up to my cheap, unimpressive apartment building, the contrast with the world we'd just left was jarring. But it didn't matter. I started, not knowing how to say goodbye. "I'll call you," he said, cutting me off. Simple. Direct. A promise. I nodded, my heart too full for words. I got out of the car, but before I could close the door, he spoke my name one last time. "Liam." I turned back. He was leaning across the seat, his face framed in the open doorway. The streetlights cast long shadows, but I could see his expression perfectly. "Thank you," he said, and I knew he wasn't talking about the project. He was talking about the lifeline. I just nodded again, a lump in my throat, and closed the door. The silent car pulled away, disappearing into the night, leaving me on the curb in the sudden, shocking quiet. I stood there for a long time, the cool air on my face, feeling the phantom pressure of his forehead against mine, the ghost of his arms around me. The fortress I had so carefully built over a lifetime was gone, reduced to rubble. I was unguarded, exposed, and utterly terrified. But standing there, under the vast, silent sky, I realized a profound and simple truth. True strength wasn't found in the height of your walls. It was found in the courage to let them fall.